How is being a Green Beret similar to being a journalist? Today's guest, Fran Racioppi, explains the similarities in mentality between the two very different professions. Fran is a retired Green Beret and the host of the Jedburgh podcast. Fran tells us about his passion for journalism and what led him to joining the Army and eventually to becoming a Green Beret. Otis, Fran, and I talk about the importance of focusing on your audience and how that mindfulness improves your ability to communicate, whether you're a journalist, podcast host, or just talking with friends. We also talk about the short-sightedness that plagues much of the country and contributes to the political and social division. How can you shift your perspective towards long-term solutions? How do we help others to do the same? And why should your goal be to work yourself out of a job? Fran, Otis, and I dive into all of this and much more in this great episode. Quick reminder to rate, review, and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening. You can also find the full videos of the show on our YouTube page. And if you learned something from Fran, Otis, or me in our conversation, make sure to share the episode with someone else so they can learn it too. This episode is brought to you by Tribe and Purpose. The transition from college to that first career is a difficult one. And it's even harder when you lose your sense of identity. If you're an athlete who just hung up the cleats, it's hard to go from being a rugby player to being Joe in accounting. We created Next is Best to help retired college athletes use their skills to create an impact through entrepreneurship. Next is Best by Know Your Tribe will help to smoothen that rough transition by helping you establish a clear sense of purpose, an actionable path to success, and the tools you need to manage your life. Your 20s are a confusing and chaotic time. Next is Best gives you the tools you need to make sense of the chaos and make this next chapter of your life the best one yet. You can learn more about Next is Best by Know Your Tribe at findyourpurpose.coach. Now here's Cam and Otis with the show.
Hey, welcome to the Cam and Otis show. On this episode, joined by my favorite phrase I get to say, a brother from the regiment. Fran Racioppi. God dang it, I knew I'd do that.
We even practiced it.
I know. Whenever I practice it, man, if I just go with the flow and I don't ask, it's like, man. But you know what? There's no better way to
start to say your last name. Whenever I ask how to say it, it messes you up. It's so funny.
There's no better way to kick off the show than flub up somebody's name that's the guest on the show. Fran, I ain't even going to try the last name this time because I'd screw it up even worse. Fran, how you doing, man?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. It makes everything else easier now, so it doesn't matter what I say. So you set the bar pretty low.
I did, man, and I'm really good at that. That's how I made it through my successful career in the Army, was setting that bar really low.
You just got to make it. You don't have to exceed. You just got to make it.
That's right. That old hey, if they didn't have a minimum standard, it wouldn't be a standard, would it? Yeah, Fred. I want to jump into something because you got a great podcast. I usually save that kind of stuff to the end. What made you leap into? I mean, truthfully, going from SF dude to finance world to now broadcasting industry as a podcaster, or what was the leap there? What was the that's what I want to do? What happened?
Well, I'd call it I doubled back to where I came from. I returned to the beginning. So I'd always wanted to be a journalist. Tom Brokaw, Peter Jennings, Dan Rather, they were the network news anchors when I was growing up, when I was in college and high school. And, I was enamored by what they were doing, and I thought that was the absolute greatest job in the world, was to be a reporter, was to be a news anchor, be somebody who was able to create impact by sitting down across from people, having difficult conversations, having great conversations, telling good stories. And that was what I wanted to do. And I went to Boston University for undergrad, studied broadcast journalism. 9/11 was my junior year, and then I was coming up on graduation, faced with the choice: go to Bangor, Maine, or somewhere in the middle of Idaho or Iowa, or what are the flyover states? No offense to the people who live there, but I'm from the East Coast.
So, well, that's where you start with journalism, right? I mean, in some little itty bitty town in the middle of nowhere.
Yep, and that's what they say. You can go there and you can work 3 jobs and be a weatherman and a traffic reporter until you build your book up. Or I watched these guys with beards and long hair riding horses through the mountains of Afghanistan, and then we went into Iraq and going to seek justice upon those who attacked our country. And I said, well, I think I should go do that first. And if I want to be a journalist, I can always do that later. And so I made the decision to go into the Army and do everything I could to become a Green Beret. And when that was over, then I said, well, I paid Boston University a tremendous amount of money for this education, which I was still paying 2 years ago. I actually just finished
now
paying it off last year. And as I was sitting there in the COVID times at my mom's house, two kids living at my mother's house in COVID, I was like, what am I going to do with myself? And then I said, well, I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to do the thing that I always wanted to do. I'm going to get back to where it all started, and maybe I'll get some sort of return on this investment that I still made to Boston University 20 years later.
I love that.
Is there a connection that you saw between whether in the special forces or just going to serve your country and the drive that you had towards journalism? Like, is there kind of like a core value that you saw that connected the two of them?
Yeah, I think it's about impact. I mean, I think and we talk about this a lot on the podcast and with a lot of my guests. I mean, it's about impact. Where can you achieve the most impact? Where can you make the most difference? What are we truly here to do? Is the question that I kind of ask myself a lot. And I'm not like I don't kind of get into a ton about theory and higher purpose and all that stuff. But like we've got to help others. We have to leave a legacy. We have to build organizations and teams, and we have to leave them better than when we got there. And the special forces and special operations, there's no other organization that is as proficient and as great as they are all across the world. And to leverage that knowledge, leverage that experience. I mean, look at the mission of a Green Beret. What is the mission of a Green Beret? I mean, it is to go to a foreign nation and make them better. And that is often the standard. We joked about standards at the beginning of this, but and sometimes that is a low standard by our account, but that is a high standard by the partner that we have. And so when we talk about personal growth, we talk about personal development, I'm doing a lot about standards right now because it's New Year's, right? And everyone's like, and I, just posting some stuff here over the last couple of days, and we wake up on January 1st and they're like, I have a New Year's resolution, and on
I gotta
January 4th,
change.
it's gone. Yeah, I'm gonna change. I'm gonna, and you hear it all December. I talk to so many people. I'm gonna start working out in January. Why start working out in January? Start working out now. Why? So what? On January 1st, you're gonna wake up. You're gonna be a different person. And you're gonna go work out for 2 hours a day. No, you're not. You're not going to drink every night. No, you're not. You're not going to eat you're not going to eat 5 slices of pizza. No, that's not true. You are. But could you have 4 slices of pizza instead of 5? Can you have 2 drinks instead of 3? Can you work out for half an hour, 20 minutes? And can you do that consistently for 4 days, 5? Well, start with 1 day, 2 days, then make it 3, then make it 5, then make it 10. You got to have a standard. Figure out your standard, and then don't compromise on that standard. That's what Special Forces teaches you, and that's what journalism teaches you. And back to your question, journalism. I could do a whole podcast on my thoughts on journalism and where we've gone in 20 years. And from the people that I referenced, which really set the standard. Barbara Walters just passed away.
Yeah.
Really a legendary journalist, who asked the tough questions, was able to get along with everyone, was not a divisive figure. Okay. We look at people today in the news, and I don't care if you watch Fox or CNN or MSNBC, it doesn't matter which, or you watch the local news, which, is all death, especially here in New York. I mean, how many people were stabbed today? How many people were shot today? How many crimes were committed? It's like, guys, there's other things going on in the world, but Barbara Walters was not a divisive figure. No. Everybody talked to Barbara Walters. Castro, Putin, they're not going on Fox and CNN and these talking heads and all these people who are getting up there and pontificating their ideas, which quite frankly, most of it's a bunch of bullshit anyway. But you have to get, when you truly want to create impact, who are we creating impact for? Are we trying to create impact for these outer edges of the spectrum, or are we trying to create impact for in that bell curve, that middle 50%? And that's hard, honestly. That's hard because it's easy to go out there, say a bunch of wild things, gain a lot of notoriety by that, operate on the fringes, and it's going to look really good. Everyone's going to say to you, "Oh man, you have such a great following. You said all this stuff," and it's a bunch of lunatics on one side. Or do we want to focus on that middle 50% of normal people who want to do the right thing every day, want to be good at what they do, want the people around them to be good at what they do, and they're the ones who this country is built upon. And when you look at journalism, when you look at special forces, that's what we're doing. We're looking at the bulk of the people. We're saying, where can we create impact? How can we make them better? And how can we teach them to do it themselves? That's it.
That's the point I was chomping at the bit to say, because I add to that special forces mission of making them better, but I also like to look at it as working myself out of a job. If I can make them good enough, one of the things that I did when I was in Europe towards the end of my career is I focused on how do I get nation XYZ to do the job in country A so that my guys across the street don't have to go do it. And that's, I'm interested to hear, since we're talking a little bit about that journalism thing, I'd love to hear your opinion of that, because you said it, make them better, but how does that translate, that work yourself out of a job as a reporter and as a, I won't say reporter, as a journalist? How, does that translate in the same aspect?
Yeah, I think so, because what am I focused on? I'm focused on telling the stories of what I call modern day Jedburghs, right? And we look at Operation Jedburgh and we talk about them as visionaries, drivers of change, a group of individuals who came together as 3-man teams with very little guidance and direction. Parachute behind enemy lines, let us know what you need. We'll try to get it to you. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. And good luck. Don't let the Germans reinforce the beaches on Normandy. And if you fail, we lose the war.
Yeah, okay. The free world is over if you fail. Yeah. Hey,
all right. Good luck, guys. And what do we have? A couple hundred guys jumped in and they changed the world, right? And that is incredibly impactful. And so, when we look at what we're trying to do, what I'm trying to do on the podcast and as a outlet for journalism, and I say that all the time. I say that this is not about the podcast. This is about creating an outlet of journalism where we can tell stories and we can share lessons learned that are going to help people grow. And people are not going to enjoy every episode. We've got 107 episodes out as of today. So, we'll release we're putting a little bit of focus because we got a big event in Miami coming up next week. So we're not releasing episodes so I don't get lost, but we got about 5 more in the queue and then we're going to really be on fire, here every week. We did 65 episodes in 2022. You're not going to like 107 episodes that I did, and I don't expect anybody to, but I guarantee you're going to like some of them. And when we have 214 episodes, you'll probably like more than double what you do like right now. And when we have 500 or 1,000, it's going to exponentially increase. And so it's about creating a community. We call it our Jedburgh team. It's about creating a community, a bank of journalism that somebody can tap into and say, where am I right now? And do I want to talk and hear and find a way to improve my mental health today, my physical health today? Am I building a business? Am I an entrepreneur? Am I starting out and I want to start a startup? Okay, well, I can listen to these couple of episodes. Am I a big business? Do I want to go to the next level? Do I need to find a way to get promoted? Am I having challenges on my team? Have I suffered crisis? Do I need some leadership lessons? Do I need a philosophy on some values on how I think about leadership? Well, I can listen to this episode. So we have all of these different aspects that we're trying to hit on this thing. It would have been very easy for me to go out there and say, I'm gonna talk to veterans about veteran related issues. Okay, we'd be done. We'd be done. 2 years in, we're going to be we're 21 months in. 20, we'd be done. I had nothing else to talk about. We would have had the same conversation 107 times. We'd be circling back on the same, 4, 5, 6 guests, and nobody would be listening. We would have had a great spike at the beginning because we would have segmented them. We would have gone to a very niche market. We would have had a lot of people, and then we'd cap off. And then where would I have to go? Then I'd have to get bombastic. Then I'd have to start moving away from that center onto those fringes. How do I get these people who agitated so that they're going to listen, so that we can speak in sound bites, so that they can then take that and say, "Oh my God, did you hear what this guy said?" That doesn't build great organizations. We're at a point, I believe we're in a very decisive point in this country, and we have a crisis of leadership. Look what's happening right now. We've got 20 people in the Capitol who are elected leaders. Okay, by the way, are elected leaders who are holding the world hostage. Because, and I don't care where you come from, all right? The U.S. is the world's leader. It will remain the world's leader. And we are represented by those in Congress. And when Congress fails to do its mission and cannot go to work every day to do the mission of the people, we are failing not only our country, but the world, and we look like a bunch of clowns. Because there's 20 people in there who are 10% are holding 90% hostage. Come on. Are we that decisive? Are we that myopic? Right? Can we not come together, look at the big picture, and say, when are we going to stop this? And be the litmus test and the benchmark that the rest of the world looks at. This is a crisis in leadership, and this is a big deal.
There's an interesting thing in one of the books I've been reading by Frank Nyrick. It's a book of his essays. He's an old economist, and the one I'm reading right now is Ethics of Competition. And he talks a lot about just this really high-level philosophy and theoretical things, and then he bounces back to the very practical level of application. And that's one thing when it comes to the political level, and I think we could stretch this into other areas as well, that I think is what most people find so frustrating, is that it's all the focus on this, call it infighting or call it whatever, but it's this really short-term focus rather than ever stepping back to look at that bigger picture. Like you're talking of, it's like, hey, I don't like that guy, so we're going to stop things. No, things have to move forward. We have to make decisions. Things have to progress. And you have to, I think, one of the things that Frank Knight says I think is so interesting is that you have to have that high-level theory to work back to rather than just focusing on the short term. Because I think that's what you're talking about a lot. And I think bringing it back to the journalism world, I think that's where a lot of that negative aspects of journalism comes from, is that short-term feedback loop rather than looking at the long-term, the theory, the philosophy, or whatever that is. Because you have to have something big picture to work towards. You can't just constantly work towards those short-term goals.
Well, yes, I agree with you, and there's a few points in there. So number one, social media, the internet, the like button, okay, has taken over our lives, and don't get me wrong, like I'm not above it. Like I look at our Instagram page,
I know,
20 times a day. Okay, I beat up my team all day long about we lost one follower. What the heck? What are you doing? It's like, it's a bot. Oh, okay. All right. Why did this post get, this amount of likes and this one? And what about the percentages? Don't worry about the numbers and compare it to this. And, we do it all day long. I mean, please. So I'm certainly in no way above it, but it's all consuming. And it can force you, if you don't take that big picture approach, it can force you down that rabbit hole of, I'm just going to get up there and say, these outlandish things that are going to get me to the top of the feed. But that is propagated by these organizations who run the social media companies, who at the end of the day, we forget that it's a business. They're running a business, and we talk about free speech, and we talk about and we talk about the ability to go on to social media and have a platform to express ourselves, and all of that is important. It's vitally important. But at the end of the day, they're running a business, and that algorithm is going to push whatever gets them the most people to open the application, click the like button and make a purchase or engage it in some way so that someone's going to buy an ad to bring them revenue to continue that engagement. So we've got to keep that in the back of our mind. The challenge becomes, and this is a challenge we struggle with all day long, especially when we start talking about, well, how do you market your podcast? How do you get it out there? What else do you do?
Yeah.
What else? You're still at the mercy of them.
I want to dive into that because I think that's a great thing to talk about, because for the business owners that are out there listening to us, how do you, because I follow in that same thing just like you do. It's like, hey, Camden, how come the followers went up last week and then we didn't get any more this week, or likes and views and all those sort of things. And then I was actually talking with somebody about this just the other day, is how do we, as the person that supposedly has more enlightenment, if you will, that, hey, this is a business and their whole job is around sucking me in, but yet I want to use them. And then me, a personal thing for me, I look and I say, well, Jason liked and commented on a post, so I need to go and be reciprocal for Jason. And Fran liked and commented, so I need to go be reciprocal to Fran. And I find myself chasing that rabbit, right? And do you see the same thing happening in your world with that?
Yeah. Yeah, and your hope is that the algorithm is going to reward you for it by now front loading your content into somebody else's feed to be able to do the same. It's tough. I mean, we deal with the same thing. I was reading an article put out by one of the it was by Hootsuite is who it was from, who's like a platform where you can go and schedule your posts and stuff. And it said, it said how to achieve, the title was how to achieve social media growth, specifically on Instagram, when you don't have 2 hours a day to spend on engaging on Instagram. And I'm like, 2 hours a day. God, that's what we're up to. Like that's what the experts are telling you, that in order to effectively get your feed and your profile into a position where you're going to do what you're talking about, you have to engage in a variety of different ways for 2 hours a day. I don't know who has this. So it's a full-time job. Yeah. To do that. But then it's not even that simple. It's not like, I can just go and I'm going to like 200 posts right now. Well, the algorithm's going to shut you down because they're going to think you're a bot and you're spamming everybody. Then you're going to get shadow banned and you're not going to do anything for 10 days. Right? Trust me, I know this because it happened to us, because I tried this. Because one day I got pissed and was like, no, this is bullshit. Like, I'm just going to go like 300 things. And then next thing I know, like our posts have like 2. Like how do I have 2? Like, we have thousands of followers. How can I have 2 people that saw this? And then you see like, we've been shadow banned because they think you're a bot. So it's complex. The platforms are very different. What works on one may or may not work on another. What works on one day, we find we'll do something one day. We might do something that's damn near the exact same thing the next day, and it'll blow up.
But
and the day before that was nothing.
How do you, Fran, handle that though? In all seriousness, because there is that, you kind of got to check it because you got an account.
You got to be consistent,
unless you turned it all over to somebody.
Yeah. So we don't. Unfortunately, I cannot turn it all over to somebody because we do not have the budget yet. So, but you got to be consistent. I think the biggest way to achieve success, as I was mentioned, kind of with the whole strategy behind the podcast, is you got to take the long-term approach. There's a couple different ways. You've got to be able to, number one, take the long-term approach and just be consistent. Understand your voice, understand your message, continue to put that message out there. I'm not a patient person, but you've got to demonstrate that patience. You have to, and then you got to try to not be afraid to change, not be afraid to iterate on things, not be afraid to make small changes, even big changes, and see what happens. Maybe it's going to work. Maybe it's going to work for 2 days. Maybe it's not going to work at all. But like, that's okay. I mean, I the other thing I'll say is go look at the numbers of others. So go to Joe Rogan's page. Go to, this is what I do. I go to Joe Rogan. I go to Tim Ferriss's page. I go to like the big time folks within specifically podcasting, and then I start doing the math, and it's like, okay, well, on a percentage basis, you have like 2 million followers, but only, so 200,000 liked it, right? So, it's really like a 10%, I mean, like whatever, okay, I got 10%, like, oh, I'm cool. I got 20%. I'm better than you.
Out of our 100, so exactly.
Yeah, dude, hey, yeah, like, I'm doing better than you, Joe Rogan, like, haha. So. Yeah, but there's an element of patience to it, and there's an element of trying new things, see what works. What we find to be the most successful is partnerships. We find that like when we can expand reach through partnerships, meaningful partnerships, and doing the right thing. I mean, it comes back to that standard. I'm not going to compromise the standard. We're not going to start saying outlandish things. We're not going to get all crazy, because the other thing too is people aren't going to want to talk to you. Yeah. I referenced somebody like Barbara Walters. You look at like somebody like Tom Brokaw. Everyone wanted to talk to them. Everybody wanted that chance to sit down and talk to them. There are a lot of people who won't go on people's shows today, right? Because they don't want to be put into a box. They don't want to be cornered. They don't want to be forced into a soundbite. Let's have open and honest conversations. Let's have difficult conversations. I'm not saying that we should just. We should grab, some candy canes and, be, all joyous and not ask hard questions and not push people for answers. We should absolutely do that. But we can be respectful about it, and we can value their opinion. I've referenced it a few times. Patrick Murphy, the former Secretary of the Army, congressman from Pennsylvania, when my interview with him, when he came on the show, he said, you can disagree, but you can't be disagreeable.
Love that.
And what we see is that people disagree, and then they just throw their hands up and they're like, whatever, I don't like you. We're going to release an episode in a couple of weeks here with Mike Waltz. So Congressman Mike Waltz, Green Beret, Lieutenant Colonel in the SF Reserves, National Guard, but represents Florida's 6th district. And we talk a lot about the fact that the veterans in Congress, in this 118th Congress, there will be, I think it's like 93 veterans are going to serve across both the Senate and the House of Representatives. There are like 30 Army veterans in the House of Representatives alone. And the hope out of people like Congressman Waltz and many of the other veterans is that they're going to adopt that attitude. And Patrick Murphy was an Army JAG officer, and that they're going to be able to come together and they're going to be able to adopt that attitude, that they're going to be able to say, we're here for the greater good. And it is expected that we are not going to agree on absolutely everything, but we have to move forward. We have to find progress. Newt Gingrich came on my podcast last year. And Newt Gingrich, can be a decisive figure, but Newt Gingrich was extremely effective at bridging the aisle. He was extremely effective at getting things done because the attitude amongst, this 20 years ago now, was this is for the betterment of the country, and the country comes first. And why do you have to lose for me to win? And the attitude that we have now that's permeated our society and permeated so much of life is, you've got to lose for me to win. And that's just not reality. That hurts our society. And we have to be attuned to that.
One question that I had, getting ready for the show was, talk about the incentive structure of journalism. I always think the incentive structure is such an interesting piece of, basically to sum it up, of just, are people shitty or is the system shitty? It's kind of always a fun question when you look at something that has issues. And as we've been talking about social media, it's the thing that kind of occurred to me a little bit is that social media is kind of the incentive structure that all of these things are being layered on top of, because that's kind of where we function and live nowadays. So what I'm curious about, Fran, is do you think, or I guess, what do you think is the way to get back to the long-term thinking when the tool that we're using, the incentive structure that we're all using, is so short-term?
That's like a meaning of life question.
Yeah, I realized that after I said that. I was like, damn, all right, we might have to pause for a second.
How do you get back? I think it will take a shift in the attitude of the populace. I think I don't like the term hope. I tried to never say the word hope because I don't believe hope is a course of action, but I do believe that as a society we will get tired of it. My fear, and I've talked about this with a couple of people, my fear is that it's going to take a cataclysmic event in order for us to realize how far we've fallen, and that's the danger. And that event is out there. We don't know what that event is. We don't know if that is some sort of national security incident, whether that event is an economic incident. We don't know what that event is, but the event is on the horizon, and there are there's a lot of, and I'm not a doomsday kind of way, but that next significant cataclysmic event that will shape the country is out there in the very near future, I believe. The problem is, now that's been the case of history. Okay. Like the events like this of all types and forms and shapes have happened throughout history. We always talk about resilience. We always talk about how do we come back? How do we respond? Well, our ability to respond is going to be dependent upon our ability to coalesce as a nation and the speed by which we're able to do that. I think that after 9/11, I think after a lot of events that we've had throughout history, we've been able to bounce back very quickly because you haven't seen the division that you have right now. And there is just a tremendous amount of division, and the true magnitude and the detrimental effect of that division will not be noticed, in my opinion, until that cataclysmic event happens. And that at that point it's going to be too late. And that's what I find to be very dangerous.
I agree with you. And, I hadn't thought about that. That's a good point. Because I have vivid memories of, 9/11.
This episode is brought to you by Tribe and Purpose. If you're a college athlete who just hung up the cleats and you're looking to make an impact as an entrepreneur, then Next is Best by Know Your Tribe is perfect for you. Get a clear sense of purpose and a path to success so that you can make a bigger impact and make this next chapter of your life the best one yet. Learn more today at findyourpurpose.coach. That's findyourpurpose.coach. Now let's get back to the show.
First off, being there in the shop at the regiment and it happening, and we're like packing rucksacks and ready to go and never getting the phone call sort of thing. So going home that night, sitting there on the curb with all our neighbors. But that was, you're 100% right. That was pre-social media, pre-extremism of divisiveness. And the other thing that comes to my mind, especially when we're talking about politicians, is the narcissistic way that we've become. In the look at my post and we judge our value, our narcissism is increased. And I particularly believe this with politicians, in that self-serving way of being the extremist, to represent my, one of the Colorado representatives, I can't remember her name and it's not worth saying anyways.
Crazy girl.
Yeah, the little lady, short lady. Anyway, she's one of those that she fights for the soundbite in a very, very narcissistic way, not in a how do I help my constituents, but how do I get out, and look at me, and we've seen that in the last 5, 10 years. It's been a lot of it's not the victim sense, it's the blamer sense. When as a coach, when I talk about that sort of helping people understand themselves, they're not playing the victim. That's what media has been calling it. They're playing the victim, but they're not playing the victim. They're playing the blamer, and the blamer blames everybody else for anything that's wrong that they believe is wrong in their life and prevented them from doing it in their life. That's not a victim. That's a blamer, and blamers are are worse than victims in my book, because the victim is the person that sits in the corner and goes, "Woe is me," and doesn't do anything. The blamer is the one that gets up on the street corner and yells at everybody for not agreeing with them and being, you name it, Nazis and what are the other words? Whatever the other words they use, I tend to block those things out because they're not worth my memory space. But that's where I see the problem, is this narcissistic view, and it goes back to what Camden talked about, the incentivization of our journalists is how quickly, how many clicks and likes their story gets, how quickly those happen, which means that well, there's a whole lot of things, and we can get into that. That's a whole nother show of diving into that problem set. But how do we demonstrate that there is more to the world, the life, the individuals? You touched on it. Serving others. One of my favorite Tony Robbins quotes is giving is living, and that is 100% it. And I believe that. How do we begin the as Jedburghs, making that the small groups making the influence to change to save the free world? How's that for a big question?
You guys are battling on the big question.
Yeah, I'm just going to pop. It's over on your side now.
I was going to say, I got a short answer for it, Dad, which is just modeling. You can't change anyone else's behavior. You can't force anyone to do anything. You can't convince anyone to do anything. The another Frank Knight quote, sorry, I'm reading him a lot, is that there's no objective reason for anyone to believe anything. So trying to be objective and using objectivity as a reason to convince somebody is kind of a pointless endeavor compared to just the modeling of it. What Fran was talking about earlier of you just do it. You focus on the middle of that curve, and then in theory, this is the optimist in me, but in theory, other people focus on the middle of the curve eventually too.
Yeah, we have to be willing to demonstrate. We've got to take that first step. I knew a guy on, his name is Colin Bevan, and he talks about limiting beliefs, and there's these three limiting beliefs, and one of those limiting beliefs is that you can't change anything. That other people will do it. It's up to the politicians. It's up to people who are you believe are more important than you, and so why would you even try in the first place? That you just go back into your room, sit there, stare at the wall, don't even try, just forget about it. You're never going to have an effect. And what you have to ask yourself is, well, what if I do have an effect? Why not? Why not me? Right? There's I was talking to somebody yesterday, about startups, funding startups. It was a bank. And they're like, oh, well, you have to be in business for X amount of time, and you have to have X amount of revenue in order to in order to get credit to help scale your business. And my point was, well, how do you scale your business if you can't get credit to scale your business? We're in this circle here, right? And I said, Coca-Cola started with some guy in a barn in the 1800s mixing a bunch of chemicals and some equivalent of cocaine, right? And it's, look what it is today. You got to sit there, and it's got to start somewhere. You have to be willing to take that first step. People have to be willing to take that first step. They can't just throw their hands up. And so when you talk about change. Change isn't going to occur until people start coming together and say, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to hear about it. I mentioned, we talked a little bit about what's going on here, this week in the House of Representatives. I mean, that's my opinion. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to see this. I don't want to hear it. This isn't what I expect out of our elected leaders. This is not mature, statesmanship. This is not what our country is founded on. And these are the people that we elected. They represent us. Mm. And until the people stand up and say, I'm not going to do this anymore, I'm not going to entertain this, then there's not going to be any change.
Let me ask you this, because this just popped into my head, and being the poke in the bear sort of way. Are we propagating the problem because we're identifying these issues, these parts and pieces? Now, there's not one single thing, but we're identifying these issues, and one of them being the use of social media and how that's influenced us and how it's changed the attitude. Are we, the three of us in our businesses, propagating this problem because we use social media to promote our products?
Yeah, but I think it's a matter of how do you use it. Mm-hmm. And it comes back to, what are you going to do? Are you going to not use it? Are you going to not go on Instagram? I mean, number one, how are you going to promote what you're doing? But I would say it's about how are you using it? Mm. Are you using it to basically be bombastic and drive up your like count, or are you focused on your audience? And there's a lot, tons, hundreds and thousands of studies on this, that you can have a small engaged audience who likes you, is focused on you, and that will be more meaningful than having a massive audience who just follows you because they think it's fun or funny, but they won't engage. Okay, so I would rather have 3,000 people who care about what I say, engage with me, talk to me, want to have important conversations, want to become better versions of themselves, want to build great teams and organizations, are focused and contribute to the community that we're building, than 100,000 who don't really care. So the way that so are you propagating it? I mean, I don't think so. I think you have to, I think if you focus on your audience, you focus on building a group of people around you who care about what you have to say and your opinion and share your common values, then focus on them, and that will grow. It's going to just take time to get there.
I'd say we don't propagate it any more than driving on the highway propagates road accidents. Like it's a tool that we're all using, and we all accept that we got to use it, and it's dangerous, and there's dangers that come with it. But it's kind of, to Fran's point, it's more just how are you going to use it? How are you personally going to use it? Are you going to drive safe? Are you going to be safe on social media, I guess is the way to put it. But what this brings to mind is something kind of in the same vein of when we talk about, or Fran, earlier when you were talking about Barbara Walters and, what journalism used to be like versus what we see a lot of nowadays, one of the things that came to mind was, is it a difference of personal curiosity versus sharing my ideas? And I think we think about this in terms of, Dad, we talk about it with politics and leaders, like you want the reluctant leader. And it's almost like it is my personal curiosity. And if someone else gets it, it's good. But the people who are making it bad are the people who are trying to tell you their ideas. Would you agree with that, Fran?
Yeah. That's a really good point. And this is something that we talk about this every day. And I'll tell you that, like, I get DMs on social media. People email me, they call me, and they're like, you don't talk enough. your guest talks too much. We want more of your opinions. You need to get up there and say more about what you think. I get an equal amount of people who contact me and they say, shut up. You talk too much. Your guest needs to talk more. Nobody cares about your opinion. You're there to facilitate the conversation and ask the questions. So the short answer is I have no idea. No, I do have an idea. It comes down to who. What are you trying to do? Okay, are you trying to be is it about you, and are you making it about your opinion, your thought, your voice, good or bad, whatever your opinion is, right? It doesn't matter. Okay, I'm not saying that those shows are not wildly popular. They are. I mean, they're some of the most highly rated shows in journalism, on television, on the radio, are in podcasting, are people who don't have guests, who just get on and they just talk.
Yeah.
And they give their ideas. There are an equal number of shows where people go on and they have guests and they don't say much and they draw out really important points from their guests and people take a lot away and they're equally as successful. And then there's a combination of the two. Rogan's a good example of a combination of the two. Tim Ferriss is more on the look. I'm an academic. I ask questions. I dig in. I go a little deeper, and I let the guest drive it. Every once in a while he'll throw out his opinion. And then there's other folks who, it's them. So you kind of got to figure out like what's your mission, what are you trying to do, and what's the focus that you want your show, your brand to be on. I know for me, I much more focus on my guest. Certainly, I have my opinions and I share them when the venue is right. I don't believe taking the spotlight away from my guest is the best course of action for the show that I'm building. I believe that for the show that I'm building, we have to. We're having a guest.
We got a special guest appearance.
We have a special guest appearance for everybody. So you can cut it if you want, but this is the real boss. Doesn't care that the door is closed and the light is. I have a light out there. It's a little sign, a light box, and it says Jedburgh Podcast on air. Everybody knows. Don't come in at Jedburgh Podcast on air. There's one person in the house who does not care what's there.
Fran,
what's up, buddy?
Can you go to mommy real quick?
One question you just got me thinking, Fran.
He's the real boss.
What? And just quick answers on this, or 1, 2, 3, whatever comes to mind. Of people in journalism nowadays, whether it's podcast or on TV or wherever, that you think kind of like check all those boxes of these different personality things we're talking about. Like some of your favorite folks in journalism nowadays. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Let me just try to. Can you go to mommy, please? I know, I'm gonna do it.
Well, who's his favorite journalist?
Me. I'm his. Can you go to mommy, please? All right. Okay. So sorry. Hang on. Sorry, guys.
Well, Dad, I want to throw it over to you a little bit. As we're talking about that personal curiosity versus sharing the ideas and that type of thing. Do you think that's something that's kind of like intrinsic? Like, is this, we talk about solving different problems. Do you think it's something that can't be solved in that way?
Sorry.
Well, what I've been thinking about, and without getting too far ahead of myself, is how do it all boils down to maintaining your values. You use the word standards, Fran, but it's more your values and how do I can stand, I have this image and I don't remember where I saw it, but it's one of those kind of like sped up videos of one guy standing on the street corner in New York and the thousands of people just going by, and this one guy is just standing there. And if you think about it in that sense, that's a great place to be. Don't be the person who just goes with the flow because, hey, I need to be on this and I need to make these comments to get more likes. And if you do anything, and there's several Stoic quotes that come to mind, but if you do anything that that goes against your values to better yourself, to quote unquote better yourself, then you're not bettering yourself. So that's what all this talk of how do we use the social media and maintain our standards and don't be that person who goes with the crowd. Because ironically, we're talking about the mean, but the crowd that we see is the extremes on either side, and I think that's something to think about.
Well, we talk about the vocal minority. Is the term that we throw out at that. We say there's a vocal minority, and then when that gets picked up, that becomes the what is represented as the majority. And I say this when I coach organizations and leaders all the time. People will come in. Okay, well, they think this. Who's they? Let's define they. The company thinks this. Okay, the company, what's the company? A name and a logo. The company doesn't think anything. There's people who work here. Who are the people? And are we talking about two people who walk around the office all day and say that you're a bad leader? Because they'll come in. Oh, my company hates me. Okay, who? How many people work at your company? 100? All right. Are we talking about, 2 or 3 people who walk around all day long saying that you're terrible? Or are we talking about 97 people who think that? Because these are vastly different, right? The approaches that we now have to take. I think you have to have an opinion. There's, we say all this, and you ask me, who I kind of look up to and who I think sets some of these examples. You still have to have an opinion. You can't just we're not robots, we're not machines. We have emotions, we have feelings, we have opinions. I sit here all day and talk to people. I watch the news, I read, I form my own opinion and thought on this. I think what it comes down to is what's the venue by which you want to put that out? And when is the time in which you put that out? And what is the manner in which you put that out? We're having a great conversation here. And again, I'll commend you guys, right now. I really appreciate you bringing up all these points. It's certainly much different than the direction I thought we were going to go with this conversation. But this is super insightful and a really important conversation to have. But at the same time, I'm not sitting here saying this person sucks and they're the devil and they need to go and fire them. And we're not doing that. We're having you can have conversations about difficult topics and still maintain some level of professionalism, still maintain calm. When we talk about bringing calm to chaos, that's one of the mottos, one of the driving values of being a Green Beret, bringing calm to chaos, masters of chaos, finding clarity in crisis. Another interview that I did is coming out in a couple of weeks with Mark Polymeropoulos, was a senior executive at the CIA, wrote a book called Clarity in Crisis, and it's about when everything looks like it's a mess. What's our job as leaders? It's to put the cool head on our shoulders, have the emotional strength. I talk about emotional strength in almost every episode. And we can still have educated, thoughtful conversations about the topics at hand without diving into some attack on people. Nobody's waking up every day. Well, there are people, don't get me wrong, but the majority of people are not waking up every day and saying, I'm going to work today to make this a worse place. I'm a senator or a congressman, and I'm going to work at the Capitol today to make this country worse. No one's doing that. They have a different opinion. They have a different agenda. They fundamentally believe something different that I may or may not believe. But when I sit across from them, do I need to tell them that they suck and they're wrong? No, my job is to ask them their opinion, understand their perspective, help me to understand what I might not see. Do I have the curiosity to ask that? And then ask the challenging questions that are going to drive that out and that are going to draw that out and get other people to think. That's what my focus is. And I think that we've been very fortunate over the last 2 years now to have had some truly amazing guests on the podcast, some of the foremost leaders across business, government, military, social activism, you name it. We've had them on, athletes, and we've had very, very important conversations about topics that are near and dear to all of our hearts and making people better. And we have done it in a way that has yielded us more and more guests of the same caliber. And I think that, to me, like, that's the litmus test. Having one big, I'll call it a big name, but having one person on, who's well known is great. We can all get lucky. And I've gotten lucky. Don't get me wrong. Like, there are ones where I've been like, no way this person's coming on, and they're like, yeah, absolutely. When can you do it? Tomorrow. Okay, great, let's do it. I happen to be available. But I think when you look at the bulk of work, you say, have we consistently been able to execute at a high level, to have the right conversations with the right people in the right manner, and does it continue to work? I have a couple of screens here, and I literally just got a text right now, and I can't disclose right now who this is, but this is a major household name. Just texted me to come on the show, agreed to come on the show, and like, that makes my day. And that shows me, like, we're doing something right here. We just got to keep going. We just got to, keep going, make some small changes, keep going, do the right thing.
Fran,
it's not that hard. It's easier to do the right thing.
Yeah.
It's easier to,
So, Fran, I gotta say, you are such a pro. So I asked him a filler question when you ran off with your son. Accidentally came out as a big hairy question, because that's the theme of today. You answered on the big hairy question, segued back to the question I had asked you before, which was amazing. You said, pro move, gotta commend it. But I gotta say, drilling down a little, give me at least one name. You answered the question really well, but come on, give us a couple names of folks you like in journalism.
Yeah. I gave you a couple of names through this conversation. Look, I mean, my all time hero was Tom Brokaw. It'd be difficult for me to tell you why, just because I think he was the guy that we watched every single night at home. He was, I've read all his books. I think his perspective on the Greatest Generation, I think, is spot on. I think that's a book and a series of books that should be read by everybody. We're very spoiled. Our generation, we're very spoiled. And I think we're paying that price now too, to be honest with you. I think we've always looked to our parents and our grandparents to solve our problems. I think that the World War II generation is truly the greatest generation, because they truly understood that nobody was going to solve this problem but us, and they did. And then when they came home from the war and after the war, they understood that we now have to lead. We now have to continue to solve and solidify who we are, what this generation is, what this nation is. And I think that subsequent to that, they had children and they looked to their parents to solve their problems. And then they had grandchildren, and that's us. And we looked to our grandparents to solve our problems. And now our grandparents are not here, by and large, anymore. That greatest generation, there's only a few left. And our parents, are one step less effective, one step removed. And we're 2 steps removed. And the next generation is 3 steps removed and never met people of the greatest generation. And now we forget. And when we forget, we repeat. And that's the danger, that I was talking about earlier. So, but yeah, to answer your question, so Tom Brokaw, I think, was, in his heyday as the anchor of the NBC evening news, was an absolute model of in journalism. I think Barbara Walters, she integrated women into journalism, at and I think that the entire industry has her to thank for that. I think that there are some more polarizing figures who have been instrumental in journalism, for better or worse. I think that Howard Stern did a lot in advancing journalism, but more on like these are my opinions and this is what I think, and I'm a shock jock, and I'm gonna, whether you like them or not. And some days I like him, some days I don't like him. But he did a lot in the advancement of the industry, if you want to call him a journalist. I think guys like Bill O'Reilly, for all his whatever faults have come out in the last few years of him or not, it doesn't matter. Like, he was a guy who happened to also graduate from the same school that I did, but he was very good at creating a divide between being a commentator and being a reporter. And I watched a speech that he gave when I was in undergrad, and he came back to Boston University, and the very first thing he said, I am not a reporter. He said, I'm a commentator. And he foresaw a lot of what the evolution of the industry has seen over the last 20 years, in that he did a really good job of saying, you come on the Bill O'Reilly show, we're not reporting the news. I'm going to give you my opinion. I'm going to challenge you on your opinion. And that's what it is. If you want to watch a report on the news, you have to go somewhere else. Now we don't do that. With that differentiation is not there. That differentiation is put on the viewer to have to interpret. Am I watching commentary or am I watching the news? Number one. But number two, the news is commentary now. And, and it burns me, especially, we kind of there are certain periods of time where we kind of we expect more out of our journalists. And that's, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. And that's, 5 to 7 at night. And those are times where, I believe and maybe that's just, old school theory, but that's when you watch the news. When I was growing up, when you were getting ready to go to school or going to work, it's the first thing I do every morning at 7 o'clock. I'm in my office here about 5. And then at 7, I go into the kitchen. I get my daughter ready to go to school and get her on the bus, and I put the news on. But there are only a few channels I'll watch, because I don't want that period of time. I want to know what happened yesterday since last night, and I want to know the big stories of the day, and I don't want to hear someone's opinion about it. A lot of organizations have blurred that line. A lot of organizations now have really ruined specifically those periods of time to be able to come in and just tell me what's going on and let me decide. Let me decide for myself what's going on without your opinion. And I think that the nightly news is another aspect for that. And I think the nightly news has done, specifically the network nightly news I would say has done as good a job as they can to stay away from some of that you see on like the cable news networks. I mean, since some of the cable news network stuff like this just, it does. I can't watch any of them for an extended period of time, because you're just like the best is like whether you agree or not. Like, I mean, I'll agree with people and just get pissed and be like, this is enough. Like, now you've taken it just so far to the extreme that it's nonsense, and then you'll switch to the other channel and it'll be a complete opposite. And it's like, what do you mean? I just watched this guy say the opposite thing. And the unfortunate thing in this situation is that you're putting the onus on the observer, which is which is good and bad. But we have to understand who our audience is, and if our audience is that middle 50%, and we have to understand, are they going to stop and interpret what they're seeing, and are they going to take that objective look at everything? Are they going to think about and say, is this the facts? Should I believe it? Do I need different data sources? Should I research it somewhere else? Most people aren't going to do that. And that's the danger. So yeah, I think those are some folks who I think really kind of influenced the industry, good and bad, and some folks that I've looked up to, throughout my time.
You reminded me of something, and when I was a young captain on the teams in Bosnia, how I was shocked at how the population was so influenced through, and this is pre-social media, of course, through an article in the local paper and rumors generated throughout the neighborhood, throughout the region, and how quickly those things and those opinions influence. And it would just shock me. And I never thought about this until now. That was a pre-social media thing, because I think you've hit an interesting point. Is the fact that we were able to gather the information here in the U.S. Because the old yellow press, look it up in history books, kids. The old yellow press thing, everybody knew the National Enquirer was yellow press, right? We all knew that. But when we'd watch at 5:30 the evening news with Tom Brokaw or Peter Jennings or any of those guys, we knew we were getting objective facts. And then I go over to Bosnia, and the yellow press hasn't been, identified. And that spun so much social opinion. And I never really kind of put two and two together. That was a pre-social media thing. And I saw so much social opinion and influence and things. And I just sit back and go, that's not true. Having a cup of coffee with a guy or a macchiato or whatever, and I'd be like, that's not true. That's not, we're not going to drop a nuclear bomb on, Srebrenica or whatever because the Serbs are doing this, and those were the things that would spin out of control so quickly. Yeah. And that's what social media has allowed to happen in a much more rapid fashion.
Well, propaganda has been used for the dawn of civilization. I mean, we've seen it most prominently displayed on the world front in the last year with the Russia-Ukraine situation, and how much propaganda has been inserted into Russian media, by the Russians, about the Ukrainians and what they've made the threat to look like, to the Russian people. And you're seeing, mass portion of the Russian people who are saying, this is bullshit. It's not even true,
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go back to, like I said earlier, I got ahead of myself and what did I learn? But I'll even use an old Army term of here's my foot stomper also. So it's not only a what did I learn, but it's also a re-emphasize for everybody else out there is hold your standards and your values true. And if you do that, then you can get on social media and you can unfriend or delete or whatever, or ignore, even better, just ignore, as long as you uphold your standards. And I think that's my re-emphasis in what I learned today. Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
Because I was just making a note to myself because I wanted to, whether I'm writing or talking with you about it, I had a really interesting thought. We're talking about social media a bunch, and there's this really kind of, and I don't like this thought, but it's this really elitist thought that a lot of people get with social media, where it's like the giving the voice to everybody is a problem, and it's very opposite of the spectrum from how we feel about democracy. And there's this really weird negative connotation there. But I think there's an interesting thing, Fran, when you were talking about the generations and taking that responsibility. What made me think is that we're thrusting this responsibility onto a bunch of people, and they might be flubbing up that responsibility right now. But responsibility takes time. Growth takes time. Learning takes time. And it may be, again, this is the optimist in me, I'm guessing, but, generationally looking forward, that responsibility isn't necessarily a negative thing. Democracy is a good thing, whether it's on freaking social media or it's in voting, whatever it is. Giving it to more people is a good thing. But if you give something to somebody that they haven't had before, it's going to take them some time. You give somebody a car, they're going to take some time to learn how to value that car. If they work for it and build it up, if you're talking about the greatest generation, then they're going to have that value built in. So that's what I don't know if I can say I learned that, but that is a new thought I want to work on. So.
How about you, Fran? What'd you learn?
Yeah. You got to do the right thing. Just wake up and do the right thing. Whether you're doing it in journalism, you're doing it in politics, you're doing it at your job, on your team, and your family. And I didn't always do the right thing. I think I did for a long time. I think I didn't for a very long time. And I think today I like to think that I wake up and I try to do the right thing. And I think if you do that and you approach every day and every interaction that you have with people with the thought process of I'm going to do the right thing today. I'm going to ask the right questions. Some are going to be hard, and that's okay because that's the right thing to ask. But I'm going to treat people with respect because that's what I expect out of them towards me. And I'm going to give my ideas and I'm going to give my thoughts and I'm going to present myself on social media and I'm going to present myself to the world in a way that I want to be represented and I want people to think about me. And maybe I don't get 1 million, 2 million, 5 million people who follow me, but maybe I get a couple of thousand who care very deeply about what I have to say. And it's going to take me longer to get there. Well, then tomorrow I'm just going to wake up and keep doing that because eventually I'll get there.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that drive. Love that focus. How do folks follow you, find out what's going on, who this next special guest is on the Jedburgh podcast? What's
a couple different ways. So number one, go to jedburghpodcast.com is where you can find all a lot about us on there. Whatever, we're on 30 plus podcast platforms, so Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, or iHeart, wherever you get your podcasts, you should be able to find us on there. Check out our YouTube page. It's at Jedburgh Podcast on YouTube, or just Google YouTube Jedburgh Podcast. We do all of our episodes are video and audio, specifically over the last year, and you'll see that evolution. So if you go to episodes that are a couple of years back, they're audio with just a cover on there, and the views are super low. If you go to then if you look at like earlier in 2022, it was like remote, and then views go slightly up. And then if you go a little bit further in 22, there's one camera and views go slightly up. And then we do a 3 camera set. And then our stuff that's been professionally shot has done awesome. So you can see that evolution on our YouTube page. It's caused me a lot of grief and frustration over the last 2 years. I feel like I wake up now and I finally feel like we're starting to get it. But yeah, check out our YouTube version. You'll see all of our episodes. We do everything we do almost everything in person, and we do it on location. So we don't have a studio. We've bucked the trend on needing a studio. So we've done some episodes in some really cool places, and even on the 44th floor of a building in downtown Manhattan with the World Trade Center behind me. And we just did the Veterans Day Parade in the back of a 1944 Dodge truck that now sits in my garage, to my wife's dismay, which we now is our remote podcast platform. But we call the Veterans Day Parade from the red carpet in New York City. Next week, I'm going to Wadapalooza in Miami, which is the second biggest CrossFit fitness festival behind the CrossFit Games. And very special guest host who's going to be joining me over there. So you got to check out and be on the lookout for that. They were on before. I'll say she was on before, but very special guest host for that series. Really looking forward to that. And and then starting first episode of 2023 will drop with Congressman Mike Waltz on the 17th of January.
Awesome, man, Fran. This has been great. Really appreciate the deep dives and the thought provoking discussion. Really enjoyed it and appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Right,
Camden, run us out.
The Cam Notice Show, and a special thanks to our guest, Fran Racioppi, for joining us today. Scoreboard on that one, Dad. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to pass it along to someone else so they can enjoy it too.
Got it.
Make sure to follow the Cam Notice Show on Facebook and Instagram, and you can watch full videos of the show on our YouTube page. While you're there, make sure you hit that subscribe button too. As always, the full archive of our episodes is available at camnoticeshow.com. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.